of the world's greenhouse gas emissions each year. The gases released include carbon dioxide, a major cause of global warming. 21 nations around the world recently joined forces to better understand and prevent greenhouse gas emissions from farms. The Global Research Alliance on Agricultural Greenhouse Gases was launched at the United Nations Conference on Climate Change. The meeting took place in Copenhagen, Denmark, in December. Agricultural experts blame a number of farm activities for producing greenhouse gases. For example, animal waste and cattle digestive systems release methane gas. Fertilized soil and the burning of crop waste also release harmful gases into the air. Experts say some methods of tilling, turning the soil to prepare for planting, also release harmful carbon dioxide. An official of the European Commission's Directorate General for Research says, agricultural greenhouse gas emissions can be cut. She suggests feeding animals a diet designed to reduce emissions. The new Agricultural Research Group says, protecting against global warming is only part of its purpose. It says the world also needs to develop better farming methods to feed growing populations in poor countries. United States Agriculture Secretary Tom Vilsack said, no one single nation can fight agricultural greenhouse gas emissions and increase food production at the same time. This is why the alliance is important for combining resources and finding new ones. The United States Department of Agriculture will increase spending on farm emissions research by $90 million over the next 4 years. The total will reach $130 million. The USDA will share the research with other countries in the Global Research Alliance on Agricultural Greenhouse Gases. The USDA will support researchers from developing countries that belong to the Alliance. Money from the Borlaug Fellowship Program will let the researchers study agricultural climate change with American scientists. Mr. Vilsack said that just as climate change has no borders, there should be no borders for research. And that's the VOA Special English Agriculture Report. You can comment on our programs at voaspecialenglish.com.
Special English Agriculture Report. Chocolate comes from cocoa beans, and more than half of those beans come from 2 countries in West Africa. But the situation is not all sweetness for poor cocoa farmers in Ivory Coast and neighboring Ghana. The United States has announced $10 million for renewed efforts to end the worst forms of child labor in the cocoa industry in those countries. The grant will support efforts to reduce poverty so parents do not have to depend on the labor of their children. Another aim is to give children more access to education. The money will go toward a new framework of action related to an international agreement from 2001. That agreement is called the Harkin-Engel Protocol. American Senator Tom Harkin and Representative Eliot Engel led negotiations with the chocolate and cocoa industries. The Department of Labor announced the grant in September, along with $7 million promised by the international cocoa industry. The governments of Ghana and Ivory Coast have also promised resources and policy support for the new efforts. Kevin Wilcuts is an official in the Labor Department's Office of Child Labor. He says the agreement shows a common commitment to address the situation and to offer children better hope for the future through education. Don DeVries is with UTS Certified, a program that tries to create a fair marketplace for agricultural products. Mr. DeVries says some crops are grown closer to cities because they must be processed quickly. But he says crops like cocoa and coffee are often grown in very rural areas with more poverty and less enforcement of rules. Bama Athrea directs the International Labor Rights Forum. She says there has been an unwillingness to act that is driven by the business proposition of getting cheap child labor to produce cocoa. Larry Graham is president of the National Confectioners Association in Washington. He said, "Our industry is fully committed to helping even more cocoa farming families through this innovative partnership." Ivory Coast is the world's largest cocoa grower, but the country has been split in half since a failed overthrow in 2002 led to armed conflict. A long-delayed presidential election was held in October. For VOA Special English, I'm Alex Villarreal.
Agriculture Report. Bees add an estimated $18 billion a year to the value of American crops. They pollinate flowers that become fruits, nuts, and vegetables. But in recent years, honeybee colonies in the United States and Europe have been shrinking. Scientists have proposed different theories to explain what is known as colony collapse disorder. New research suggests that a commonly used group of insecticides could cause bees to have a hard time finding their way back to their hive. The new research looks at the use of pesticides called neonicotinoids. They were first used in the 1990s. They are now put on the seeds of many major crops around the world. The seedlings absorb the chemical as they grow. That means farmers do not need to spray a whole field. Instead, there is a little bit of insecticide inside each plant, including the pollen and nectar that the bees want. There is not enough pesticide to kill them, but the new research in the journal Science says it may harm them anyway. Researchers stuck microchips to the backs of the bees. These chips recorded the bees' movements as they came and went from their hive. The scientists fed some bees sugar water with a low dose of a neonicotinoid. The study found that these bees were about twice as likely not to return as other bees. Michael Henry from INRA, the French National Agriculture Research Institute, says the bees basically get drunk. He says intoxicated honeybees with those small doses may just get lost and are not able to find their way back home. For some crops around the world, wild pollinators like bumblebees are more important than honeybees. Dave Golson at the University of Stirling in Britain worked on another study in Science. He says the pesticides could help explain why bumblebee populations are also decreasing. He says there were 85% fewer queens produced than when they had been exposed to what he called realistic field levels. Bayer Crop Science makes neonicotinoid pesticides. Company spokesman Jack Boyne disputed the findings. He says the authors dosed the bees at levels far greater than what would commonly be experienced in the field. He also notes that researchers are studying other factors that could affect bee populations. Some European countries have banned the pesticides, and there are growing calls to ban them in the United States as well. For VOA Special English, I'm Carolyn Presutti.
From VOA Learning English, this is the Agriculture Report. Scientists have discovered the genetic secrets of two unpopular members of two favorite food families. They hope the discoveries will produce tastier tomatoes and stronger rice. The scientists discovered the complete set of genetic information of African rice and wild tomatoes. They published their studies in 2 reports in the journal Nature Genetics. There are good reasons African rice and wild tomatoes have not been popular. Asian rice is more productive and easier to process than African rice, and the wild tomato is poisonous. Rod Wing is a plant biologist at Arizona State University. He helped map the African rice genes. He says African rice can grow in salty and even poisonous